I'm Claire Chiappetta, and this is the Cactex Media Podcast. Our guest is John Stropback. He's a two-time Olympian who rode for the U.S. in 1984 in Los Angeles and 1988 in Seoul, South Korea. John is also the founder of Boathouse Sports, a U.S.-made elite performance outerwear brand. John's leadership, commitment to his employees, and drive have inspired all who know him. So, John, welcome.
Claire, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Where did you grow up, and what do you remember wanting to be when you grew up?
I grew up in Margate, New Jersey, which is the south end of Absecon Island, which is one of the barrier islands off the southern portion of New Jersey. Absecon Island is about 7 miles long. The top half of Absecon Island is Atlantic City, which people are familiar with. And the lower half is three towns, Ventnor, Margate, and Longport, New Jersey. So I grew up on the beach.
Hey, John, when you were in your senior year of high school, you began your rowing career. Tell me a little bit about that.
My father was a superb athlete, and he wrestled and played football. And he might have played another sport, but he went through high school doing both, and he went to Haverford College and was a Pennsylvania State wrestling champion 2 out of his 4 years. And from what my mother had told me, I think he only lost 2 bouts in his entire college career. And he also played football at Haverford. So when I was growing up, I was supposed to play football and wrestle, you know.
Yeah.
When I got to Atlantic City High School, which was a big high school, you know, so I wrestled for 2 years. I played football for 1 year, and I realized pretty quickly I wasn't going to start in either, because I was neither quick nor powerful, and there were a lot of quick, powerful kids in the school, you know.
Yes.
So I stopped those sports after my sophomore year, and I looked at the rowing program, and I looked at the rowing program in part because I grew up on the water, and I was a surfer, I was a sailor, I was a fisherman, and I used to swim out a mile in the ocean, you know. So I was always on the water, and I looked at it, but at the time, the rowing program at Atlantic City was abysmal. And it was my junior year, and a new a guy by the name of Bob Garbett came over from Holy Spirit High School. And Holy Spirit High School at the time was one of the most dominant high school rowing programs in the country. And Holy Spirit, and this is the mid-'70s. Anyway, Bob Garbett came over from Holy Spirit to Atlantic City High School as a teacher and a coach, and he kind of rebuilt the program pretty easily. A couple of things had occurred. One is I was doing quite well, and the fact that I moved to this aerobic sport, I'd lost a lot of weight. Mm-hmm. So, and suddenly girls started paying a little bit of attention to me. So I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah, so I don't, I don't remember, but in the end, in my senior year in high school, we had a very strong program, and Atlantic City High School came out of the dregs and actually won the Philadelphia City Championship. So I got bit by the sport of rowing my senior year in high school, and I think it was a combination of success, the camaraderie, and to some extent the fact that here was a sport whereas rowing is a team sport, in reality, rowing is an individual pursuit, and it's an endurance sport that you just happen to participate in with other people. So I had control over my own success, you know, based on how hard I trained.
Right.
And anyway, it fit me, and that, you know, by my spring of, I guess, my senior year, I wanted to make sure that I went to a college that had a rowing program.
And where did you end up? And I think you competed all 4 years, right?
In college, yeah. So I went to Marietta College.
Did they have a strong rowing program? Is that why you were narrowing it down?
Yeah, Marietta College. Back in those days, there were really only 2 levels of rowing in the country on the men's side. One was called the Sprint Schools, which you would refer to today as a D1 program, and the other were the Dad Vail Schools, which you would refer to today as a D3 level. Marietta was extremely successful at the D3 level, the Dad Vail level, mostly because of the coach there, a gentleman by the name of Ralph Lindemuth, who started coaching, I believe, in the early 60s, and he coached through, I think, the mid to late 80s. And Ralph brought the story of Ralph, and he's a legendary coach, is he never actually rowed. he learned and understood the training programs that the Eastern Bloc was providing to its athletes in the 60s and the 70s as the Eastern Bloc started to dominate in Olympic sports.
Right.
And he further learned from some of the successes of programs like Vesper Boat Club, Alan Rosenberg, John B. Kelly, who brought a lot of that training over to the U.S. So Ralph introduced a type of training at Marietta College that most schools around the country had not been exposed to. And so he built, in the early days of Marietta, they raced at the sprint level, the D1 level, but just simply because of the size of the school, they raced at the Dadvale or the D3 level. And in the 60s, they just dominated. And when I got to Marietta in the fall of 1976, we were still extremely dominant at that level.
Right. Do you remember sort of what kept you interested in it? It must have been something that captured, your attention or your commitment to being in shape, and because it really is a different sport than a lot of other sports.
Yeah, well, again, rowing's an endurance sport, so the fundamental, the easiest way to compare rowing to another sport is think of a miler. And a miler runs, well, today they're running at the Olympic level, the world class level, they're generally running under 4 minutes. But a miler, you sprint out to get position in the first 30 seconds. Then you try to spend the next 3 minutes or so going as fast as you can, using as little energy as possible, and then sprint at the end. And rowing is very similar to that. At the Olympic level, or the college level, you race 2,000 meters. And at the Olympic level, in an 8, it takes about 5 minutes and 30 seconds. At the college level, it's somewhere between that and 6 minutes. But essentially, you go into oxygen deficit at about 35 to 40 seconds.
Right.
So from that point on, you are trying to row as hard as you can while your body is depleting energy consistently. And that's a typical endurance sport, whether it's long distance swimming or running or cross country skiing or anything, biking, triathlon. I mean, your whole objective is to train your body to sustain pain for the duration of the sport.
I read The Boys in the Boat, which I think they're going to make into a movie, and I was sort of enamored with this thought, though. You said it's an individual sport. You just happen to be in a boat.
So it's technically a single, which is also a racing cell.
But they talks a lot in the book about how, it isn't. It's like if your arms are a little longer when you're in that boat and somebody else is you're kind of constantly adjusting to the needs and capabilities of the others. And you might have to compromise your stroke a little so you benefit the boat, right? So you're all in sync. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you agree with that, or that's not how you see it?
No, absolutely. I mean, rowing is it's a team sport from the U.S. point of view.
Right.
In college and high school,
Yes.
8s are always the big boat, and I've rowed an 8 my entire life.
Correct.
But I've rowed another boat. But essentially, once the crew is put together, the 8 men and the coxswain, or the 8 women and the coxswain, the objective of the athletes is to work in unison, to sync, so that they apply the power as efficiently and effectively and symmetrically as possible so the boat gains maximum speed. But prior to getting into the boat, you're literally training to make the boat, to make a seat in the boat. So an 8 has 8 seats, and there's 4 guys on the port side, 4 guys on the starboard side, and you're training to make, in my case, I rowed port through pretty much my entire career, although I can row on either side and I can scull. But I rowed port, and when I got to Marietta, Marietta had always recruited a significant amount of experienced rowers. In the group that I came in with in the fall of 1976, is very similar to that group in The Boys in the Boat. And I'll state that by saying that the group I came into with in 1976 are still some of my best friends.
Right.
And
that's great.
And in our freshman year, we were extremely successful. In fact, we never lost a race. Ralph raced us against the varsity one time. I think it was either late fall or early spring. And he said, we won. And he said, all right, we're not doing that again. We raced against some of the biggest colleges in the country, Wisco and Yale, and we beat them. And we never lost the race. And that's the 8 guys in that boat in the Coxswain were all still alive. We all stay in touch. When the Boys in the Boat came out, it really reinvigorated our relationship. We got together on our 40th anniversary and raced in a race in Philadelphia.
Right.
And
that's nice.
all 9 of us, which was a blast. And I got to admit, we rode beautifully. We didn't go very fast, but we rode beautifully.
You know, in the Boys in the Boat, it's 34 strokes you might, be at. And then, it's that whole thing about, positioning. But they say 40 strokes. When you're at 40 strokes a minute, I guess it is. Is that still like the optimum all these years later?
Fundamentally, rowing hasn't changed. And if you watch them row back in the 30s, if you watch them, fundamentally, things aren't that much different. Of course, fundamentally, nothing different with rowing or biking or running or anything else. What's changed is the technology.
Correct, yes.
So these days, at the collegiate level, the Olympic level, we're generally rowing at much higher rates. The body of the race at the Olympic level, the Brits, the Germans, have been dominant the past, I'd say, like 5 or 6 years. And they're rowing the body of the race at about 37 strokes a minute. They're taking off at the start at 44, and they're finishing at 44 or 45 strokes per minute. So they're definitely moving faster.
That's just amazing. And the other thing that really fascinated me is when you're in the boat and you're rowing and you're giving it your all, you're not seeing anything.
Well, Claire, here's one of, you're not seeing anything, yes, because rowing's the only sport where you're going backwards, But there is a secret.
What? What's the secret?
If you get out of the start fast and you're in front, you can see everybody. And,
that's right. That's true. That's very true.
Yeah, and whereas rowing is a sport where you want to, in the last, I'd say 30 years, there's something called negative splits, and you want to, you want to conserve energy, but make sure you're in the right position as you approach the last 500 meters of the race, which at the Olympic level takes about 1:20. Negative splits is each 500 you want to go fast, and the best country in the world at doing that are the Dutch. The Brits and the Germans, on the other hand, like to get out in the lead early. Back when I was on the national team, we generally never took the lead early because we had confidence in our training, and we would try to establish and get into the lead somewhere in the third quarter of the race. But yeah, ideally the rowers' heads are forward. They're not looking out of the boat. You trust your teammates. You trust the training you've done. You trust the speed. And you trust that the coxswain is being honest with you.
Right.
But yeah, that makes it a little difficult. And
talk a little bit about how. I read about how you actually made the team, the Olympic team. There's a bit of a story there, isn't it? Because you had come out of Marietta, and that year they had a new coach, and that coach kind of rebuilt the team.
All right, so high level is, one, I came out of Marietta College, and I was generally a very small rower. At the time, I was 6'2", about 185 pounds, and the average rower at the international level then was about 6'5", 215. And the size, the height in particular, gives you a mechanical advantage, and size just gives you power advantage. So I was small, and I came from a small school. I got to Philadelphia in 1981, and I got back into rowing after a few years off, and I was doing well at the club level without really trying. So I decided in 92 to try to make the Pan Am team in 93, rowing in a boat from Vesper Boat Club, and establish myself, get on the map, so to speak. And I achieved that despite naysayers, the head coach of Vesper at the time, and other people. But I did achieve that and made the Pan Am team and stroked a boat to finish second to a very stacked Cuban crew. So that put me on the map. That said, I went to the first Olympic testing in Princeton in the fall of 1983, and there were two testing sites, and if you wanted to be considered to be on the Olympic team in '84, you had to show up at one. One was on the West Coast, the East Coast. One was Princeton. The national team coach at the time, Randy Jablonec, was the head coach at Wisconsin. I got up to Princeton. I think 36, 40 people went up there and tested. I finished in the middle of the pack, which was, from my perspective, extremely good. And Randy, Coach Jablonec, came up to me and he said, "John, you did quite well, but you'll never make the Olympic team. You're too small." So I didn't take that as gospel, and I was a little hurt for a moment. But
that's a tough thing to hear, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to hear, but I've heard that a lot of times, so you just got to keep going. Anyway, I came back to Vesper. I kept training with my training partner, and lo and behold, the governing body, the USRA at the time, the United States Rowing Association, which is now U.S. Rowing, decided, because of the poor performance of the U.S. national teams in general over the last 8 to 10 years, that they were going to seek an outside coach. And then sometime in late fall, or I don't know, maybe it was early 1984, they hired Chris Borzanowski. And Chris Borzanowski was a Polish expatriate. He had coached the Italian team to great success, and he'd also coached the Princeton women to great success. But Chris didn't know Marietta from Michigan, from Marquette, from
Right.
Monopoly,
He had no background in the sort of the collegiate, level.
And he didn't care.
Right.
He just wanted to know who could move boats.
Right.
So all of a sudden, the playing field got leveled, so to speak. And I trained diligently throughout the spring, followed his program. Showed up at, I think it was sometime in May, where Chris was going to select the top 16 athletes, 8 port, 8 starboard, who were going to go over to Europe and train. And from those 16 athletes, he was going to create the 8, the 4 with, and the 4 without. So I went to what are called speed orders, and I don't remember how many people showed up at the speed orders. But since I was a sweep rower, and sweep is where each rower has 1 oar, we all showed up in pairs, and we raced in pairs for Dave. And the first, I think the first 12 pairs automatically got invited to the camp, and then he selected some other individuals. And myself and my partner at the time, Brian Colgan, I think we finished 11th, which was great, so we were in the camp.
Oh, great, yes.
And then the camp lasted, I don't recall how many days, maybe it was 7 days, 10 days, and I think there were a total of 30 people, which Chris was going to whittle it down to 16. And on the last day, when there were only 18 left, so he's going to get rid of 2 people, one port and 1 starboard. I was the port that he sent away, so I wasn't making the trip. I was a little heartbroken, but I wasn't that surprised, because I was a little bit surprised how far I had gotten anyway. But so I went up to Chris and I said, something to the extent, I said, I'm really, I'm not happy I didn't make the team, but what do I do now? And Chris said to me, he said, Johnny, you find best starboard rower left, get in pair, and go to pair trials. Right. So, and he suggested a guy by the name of Dave DeRuff. And I found Dave, who had been cut from the camp a little earlier. And Dave was a Cal rower, bigger than me, came from a big school. And we got in a pair. He agreed to come to Philadelphia. And we started training in the pair sometime in, I guess it was late May. And for the first week or two, it was really bumpy. We were really struggling to find any kind of balance and symmetry and speed.
Are you both? And so, are you each rowing? So, are you sitting one in front of the other? Is that how you're training?
Yeah. So we're in a pair, and it's just 2 guys. I'm on the port side. He's on the starboard side.
Yeah.
And the pair is often referred to as the most purest boat to race in rowing, because you have 2 guys with oars on the opposite side that have to row perfectly in perfect symmetry and unison in order for the boat to go straight and fast.
Right.
So anyway, we're struggling for a number of weeks, And we head off to our first race, which is in Corning, New York. And as we get to Corning, like we're warming up the day before the heat, and all of a sudden the boat starts to click, you know. And there's a few other Olympic hopeful pairs up at this race in Corning, and we race and we win, and we win pretty easily. So we come back to Philadelphia and feel pretty good about ourselves. You know, but we keep training because the Olympic trials are, I don't know what they were, 3 weeks away maybe. And should I continue?
Yeah.
Continue?
Yeah. So what happened? Yeah.
So we're training, and the Olympic trials are the end of June in 1984. And the Olympic trials, or just rowing in general in 1984, was challenging because every Olympic year in all sports, all the athletes come out.
Right,
you know?
Exactly. They all want to make the Olympics, yes.
They all want to make the Olympic team. You know, particularly in the traditionally sports that people consider Olympic sports and only watch during the Olympics, like swimming, rowing, track and field, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So not only do we have the athletes coming out because it's the Olympic year, but you have all the athletes left over from the 1980s.
Because the 1980 Olympics didn't happen because we boycotted because they were in Russia. Yeah.
And I don't know what the exact number is, but at least 70% of the men that did not get to compete in 80 kept training and came out for the 84 Olympics.
It's
so
pretty amazing if you think
difficult.
about it. Yeah.
Right. So we show up for the Olympic trials, and it's a 4-day event. You have heat, you have repechage, you have semifinals and finals. And that's the typical Olympic agenda, although the Olympic agenda has those 4 races over the course of about 7 days. There are, I don't know, I think they put a cap on the number of boats that could actually show up, and it was 48 or 36. Whatever it was a big number. And in those, the top boats were the world champion or the world pair that had competed in 1983. It's 2 guys out of Detroit Boat Club. There was a pair that came out of Korzeniowski's camp. They were one of the favorites. There was another pair that was rowing over in Europe that came out of Penn AC Rowing Club, which is a Philly-based club on Boathouse Row. And we were up there. But I think we were kind of the dark horse.
But you were just 2, right? Because you said you always rowed in 8, in boats of 8.
Right.
But you were trying out in a boat for 2.
Right. We were trying to win the Olympic trials in the pair and go to the Olympic trials and race the pair.
Oh, okay, got it. Yep.
So at the Olympics, the rowing agenda has on sweep rowing. There's a pair, a 4, and an 8.
Got it. Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then in sculling, which is you have 2 oars, you have a single, a double, and a quad. So anyway, we were trying to win the pair, and the pair it happens to also be one of the most hotly contested races at the Olympic or world level, because whereas the 8 is the premier event, there aren't that many countries worldwide that can boat a fast 8. So usually at the World Championships or the Olympics, there might only be really 4 fast 8s, and there might only be 7 that are coming to race. Whereas in a pair, you know, smaller countries can find 2 really strong rowers to put in the pair. And in fact, the reigning pair right now comes out of Croatia. So usually at the Olympics or World Championships, you might have 36 or 40 pairs that show up, and they're all fast, you know. So anyway, we go to the Olympic trials, and in our heat we draw the pair from Penn AC, which is one of the favorites, and we race side by side. They decide to sprint with 400 meters to go, and we let them go, and they win. So we're now in the repechage, and we actually wanted to do that because we wanted more time in the boat. So we race in the repechage, which is in French, I think it means re-row, but it's a chance to get back into the semifinals. So
you really strategized that you would lose, and then you would be able to show more, kind of demonstrate your skill more in front of the coaches?
Not demonstrate the skill, but again, most of the pairs that had shown up to the Olympic trials had been in a boat together for years, or at least the better part of a year. And Dave and I had only been in the boat at this point for 6 weeks.
Got it. Okay.
So we did strategize and said that if we're not in a clear lead if we were going to have to battle to win the race, that we would prefer to go in the repechage and get more time in the boat together than exert that energy.
Got it.
Right?
Okay.
So we lose to, I think their names were Fran and John. They win. We row our repechage the next day, and we win easily. So we made the right bet. We got to row another race, and it really didn't cost us a lot of energy. The semifinals, all right, now you're down to 12 boats. So all the other boats, whether it was 28 boats or 24 boats or whatever it was, are eliminated. And the semifinals are 2 races of 6 each, and 3 go to the final. We draw Fran and John again, and we have a couple other fast boats in the race. Race proceeds just like our first heat. We row side by side with Fran and John, and they sprint early. And we go with them for a while, but decide not to attack. And it was, I'm pretty sure, although this is, what is it? It's 36
It's
years
a
ago.
lot of years ago.
It's a long time ago, you know?
Yes.
But the fact is, they win the semi, and we're second.
Right.
And I think the third boat was far behind us. So we knew we had speed, you know, and we knew we could stay with these guys the whole way. And I think we made a conscious decision to let them go, but honestly, I don't really remember. So then the next day is the final. And we're in, usually the fastest boats are in lane 3 and 4. So they're in the middle of the race, and John and Fran are in lane 3, and the world, the team or the pair that had rowed for the U.S. the last 2 years at the Worlds is in lane 4. We're in lane 2, the next fastest boat's in lane 5, and so on. Race goes off, and I think with the first 500 meters, 4 or 5 boats are just side by side. And then over the next 1,000 meters, Fran and John start to push out, and Dave and I go with them. And I think we pretty much keep our bow ball on the guy that was in their stroke seat. So we're about a half a length
and
down.
how are you guys communicating between each other for the strategy you had predetermined? Are you just looking at each other, or are you just both of you innately know what to do because you've had the conversation? I always wondered that. Are you speaking? Are you talking?
That's a great question, because here's the funny part. So, number one, Dave and I, we're sleeping in a hotel room together. I don't think I slept at all that night. We're talking, and he slept a little, but we're talking race strategy forever.
Right.
4 in the morning, what are we going to do?
Right.
5 in the morning, where are we going to take our move? Blah, 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 blah. We knew what we were going to do. Anyway, we're side by side with the Penny Suit pair. Our bows on their stroke man, so we're about a second down. And we're just staying with them. And our plan was to go with 400 meters to go, but start building at 500 meters to go.
With 500 meters to go to qualify, John and his rowing partner, Dave DeRuff, are rowing for the lead in the Olympic trials. We will continue our conversation with John Stropback in part 2 of our Cactex Media podcast. Welcome to our Cactex Media podcast for the second part of our conversation with John Stropback. In part 1, John told us how he began rowing in high school, his views on the sport of rowing, and his desire to make the Olympic team. We pick up our conversation with John describing how he and his rowing partner, Dave DeRuff, are trying to qualify for the 1984 Olympic team. After a sleepless night, John and Dave are in the boat. The race has started, and John will tell you what happens next.
I'm keeping the pace, and Dave is in the bow, and he's the one who makes the calls. And I got to tell you, the way I remember it is that about 700 meters to go, he's talking like crazy. And the only thing I can think about, and to this day I don't know why, but the only thing I can think about is Jackie Gleason. I have no idea why. But David's talking, and he's just telling me where we are, we're fine, where we are, we're fine. He's talking about building, we're almost to the 500, we're going to go. And he calls the rate up, and we go at 500, and we start inching back on these guys. Just a little bit. And then at 400, he calls to beat up another 2 strokes, and we're starting to gobble them up. Gobbling up in rowing means you're taking about a foot per stroke. And so now I can see the stern of their boat, and I can see off my peripheral vision that we're moving. And with 300 meters to go, he says, all right, let's go.
Right.
And I mean, he's talking incessantly, and I don't know how he's talking, because at this point he shouldn't have any
energy, any breath
whatsoever.
Yes, right.
But we go through them like a hot knife through butter. And with about 100 meters left, we've got a 6-second lead.
Oh my gosh!
We go from a second down to a 6-second lead, and literally they stopped. We went through them and they stopped.
Wow!
Which is a little strange. And I don't know if they finished second or not, but the rest of the crowd was right behind them.
Right.
And we won by 6 seconds, and we were in the Olympics.
Wow! So at the Olympics, you were. What boat were you in? You were in a 2 boat.
In the pair.
Yeah, so you were in the pair. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's what I thought. That's so great. And I wanted you to, before we start talking about your company, I wanted you to tell me a little bit about the Olympics and what are your memories from that? What are your, what sticks with you to this day, all these years later?
You mean about the Olympics in general?
Yeah, just the Olympics in general and the experience, because I know a lot of, we just talked about it, and a lot of athletes want to go to the Olympics, not only to compete, not only for the recognition, but also the Olympic experience, walking out for your country, meeting all the other athletes.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you, it's unbelievably remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the opportunity. I walked in 2 opening ceremonies, LA in 1984 and Seoul in 1988. I think one of the most incredible parts of the Olympic experience is you get into the Olympic Village, and there's, I think the U.S. Basically puts about 550 athletes in the Summer Olympics, and the total number of athletes back then was close to 10,000. So you got 10,000 Olympic, 10,000 of the highest level athletes in the world all in one place. And in LA, there were 3 different villages. There was UCLA campus, the USC campus, and then the water sports, on the water sports were housed up at University of California, Santa Barbara, which was further up north because we were rowing on Lake Casitas. But then one of the beauties of rowing in the Olympics is rowing begins the day after the Olympic opening ceremonies and ends the next Sunday. So you have the whole following week, once you've completed your Olympic racing, to just enjoy the Olympic atmosphere.
Right, and go and see and meet others. Yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah. But it's a remarkable experience. Walking into the opening ceremonies in 1984 was really incredible. And the host country traditionally walks in last, and Greece always enters the stadium first.
First, yes.
And in the case of Los Angeles, they sent us in an ascending order. So the gymnasts were in the front of the U.S. team, and the basketball team in 1984 was in the back. Now, most rowers are as tall as half the basketball team, so we're back there with the basketball team, and as we're entering the tunnel to walk into the LA Coliseum, the gymnasts are entering into the stadium, and it's USA starts, and it comes rolling through the tunnel.
Wow.
And we're 10 steps in, and I don't remember if they were goosebumps, if the hair was standing up on the back of my head. I don't quite remember, but I do remember right then and there making the commitment, regardless how well I do in L.A., I was going to quit my job, and I was going to train to win a gold medal in Seoul, Korea.
Wow. Right then and there at that moment, you said, I'm doing this again, and I'm going to win a gold medal in 4 more years.
That was it.
Wow. And you did. And you went on and you did quit your job, and you did row for 4 more years, and you made the 88 Olympics.
Yeah.
And you were captain of the team that year, right?
Captain, yeah.
Of the rowing team.
Yeah, well, it's more depth to that. So I got elected captain of the rowing team by the rowers themselves, and then all the captains of the various U.S. teams got together, and we had some responsibilities, and those responsibilities included three things primarily. Our job was to nominate the flag bearer. Our job was to nominate and appoint the torch bearer, and then we were also the representative at the U.S. Ambassador's residence for a couple of events during the Seoul Olympics. So, one of the favorite, rowing at the Olympics was great in 1988, but I was not as successful as I was in LA, so I didn't win my gold medal. But there's a whole different story there. But what one of the things that I enjoyed the most is when all the captains got together. Number one is we all had to nominate and present a reason why our nominee should carry the flag or carry the torch. And in both cases, both my nominees won.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Who was your nominee in '84?
I didn't do it in '84. This was 1988.
I'm sorry. In 1988, who was your nominee?
Yeah. So the torch bearer, I nominated a guy by the name of Dave Crumpetich. And Dave was a U.S. rower. He played basketball at Minnesota, but started rowing late. And Dave was actually one of my main competitors. He rowed courtside. He rowed at a boathouse 2 doors away in Philadelphia. But Dave was like me. He worked the whole time he was training. Dave worked pretty hard jobs. He was a construction guy. He worked on road construction in the city of Philadelphia when we were building the tunnel beneath the city. And Dave was a phenomenal athlete, 6'6", 210 pounds, just incredible. But stuff happened to him, and he would get hurt, various issues. But he was persistent, and I nominated him based on his persistence and his skill. And so he got to carry the torch, and on top of that, he won a silver medal in the Olympics. And then the nomination for the flag bearer, and I got to let you know something. So I'm in this room with a lot of these athletes. Greg Louganis is in there, Carl Lewis is in there. I think Rowdy Gaines was one of the swimmers. Really, a lot of top, athletes at their peak and well known. And there's a interesting thing about high-level athletes, and I think I got a little bit of this in me too, but they tend to be introverts,
Uh-huh.
So now I'm somewhat introverted, but if people give me a reason to talk, I talk.
Right, right.
So I'm in this room with these guys, and they're making nominations, but they're not really speaking up, and I'm speaking up. So, the flag bearer, my nomination was Evelyn Ashford. And the reason I nominated Evelyn Ashford, who's a U.S. sprinter, I think this was her 4th Olympics, and she got denied in 1980. She won gold medals in 1984, but she's just a quiet athlete that nobody paid attention to. The limelight in the 80s was on
Mary Lou Retton was the gymnast from the 84.
Mary Lou Retton, a lot of the swimmers, Greg Louganis.
Right.
In track and field, it was Jackie Joyner Kersey and her cousin. And her name's escaping me at the moment. Anyway, she was a really flamboyant sprinter with long nails. Anyway, so I nominated Evelyn Ashford, put my case out there, and everybody went with it.
Wow. So.
And then based on that, all the captains said, "Well, who should represent us at the ambassador's residence?" And I guess just because I was talking so much, they nominated me, so I became the captain of the captain.
That's great. That's terrific.
Yeah, it was fun.
Now talk to me. Let's talk a little bit about your next stage of your career. So you come home from those Olympics. Had you started Boathouse Sports?
No.
And so you got back, and tell me why you decided to create Boathouse Sports. Was there a vision, or was it sort of one of those things where you kind of just ended up being, you wanted to make jackets, you wanted to make athletic jackets, and then it kind of grew and twisted and turned?
Yeah, well, we can talk about the visions, but Boathouse was not born of vision. Boathouse was born, let's call it, out of an understanding, a need to eat, and something I wanted to do. So, as I said before, as we marched into the LA Olympics, I decided to quit my job. And sure enough, in February of 1985, I quit my job, my corporate job. And the next day, I realized two things. One, I wanted to work because I don't care what sport you're in, even these days. You know, you can only really train the body hard for 3 hours a day, and then, all right, call it another hour or two for recovery and stretching and whatever. But you just can't perform that much. So what are you going to do with the rest of the day? One, I wanted to work. Two, I needed to work because regardless of the fact that I had been making money since college, I didn't have it.
Right.
And I needed I needed to eat. You know, I was burning 78,000 calories a day.
Oh my gosh!
I had to have money with which to eat. So, and then the thing I knew before when I got back to Philadelphia, or when I got to Philadelphia and started rowing again, I didn't have any rowing clothes because frankly, when I left Marietta College, I didn't think I'd ever row again. When I got to Philadelphia for the first 4 or 5 months, I was rowing in running shorts and whatever I had. And finally, some of the more elite athletes at Vesper came up to me and said, "Dude, you got to get some rowing clothes." And I said, "Where?" And they said, "Well, in the office."
Yeah.
They said, "In the office." And sure enough, Vesper, which is a prominent rowing club in Philadelphia, if you needed a pair of rowing shorts or racing shirts, they had an inventory of it in the office, and you bought it for whatever it cost at the time. But then I started asking people, well, what if you're not part of a club or a university program where you buy rowing clothes? And everybody kind of looked at me cross-eyed, and nobody had an answer. So what I knew when I came back from the 84 Olympics is there was no rowing company in the country. And so I had to eat, I needed money, and I wanted to work, so I started making rowing clothes.
Right.
And at the time in Philadelphia, you still had a number of mills in and around the city that produced cloth, and you had an enormous amount of extremely talented tailors in South Philly. Combination of Italian, Eastern European, but these great shops. And I found a mill in Warrington, PA, called Yarrington Mills, who, by the way, is still one of our biggest suppliers today, who could make the fabric I was trying to replicate. And I took fabric down to South Philly along with the pair of rowing trail I had from the Olympics and said, "Can you make these?" And they started making rowing clothes. And a business was born called Boathouse Row Sports Limited. And the business from 1985 till 1989 was rowing apparel for rowing teams. And I actually broadened it beyond rowing apparel so that it was everything that rowers might want except for the boats and the oars.
Right. That's great.
So the first 3 years of Boathouse, it was all about being a rowing company, and I literally found a niche that didn't exist, and we were selling rowing shorts, initially rowing shorts and jerseys and jackets and everything I could find or think of to the individual rower. And then it grew into teams because teams started buying in bulk. So if it was the University of Vermont, they were buying shorts in forest green, or if it was University of Pennsylvania, they're buying trowel is rowing shorts. They were buying trowel and navy, and they were buying racing jerseys in navy and cardinal. And I found a niche, and the niche was the sport of rowing. By late 1987, the business was doing about $1 million, maybe $1.5 million. I'm working pretty much full time and training,
Right.
but I set myself up very, what would I say, logically. So I live in a part of Philly near the Art Museum, which is also where Boathouse Row is. Literally, my house was less than a mile from Vesper Boat Club, and the business was located right in between. So I woke up in the morning, I went and trained. When I was done training in the morning, I'd go to work at Boathouse, and then I'd go back training 5, 6 o'clock at night, and then I'd go home and try and stuff myself with about 8,000, calories. But the business grew from 1985 to 1988 to late 87, 88, exclusively as a rowing company, doing everything from rowers. when I came back from the Olympics in 1988, I had seen what was going on. By this time, there were about 6 other companies that realized we found a niche. So now we got 6 competitors. And I looked at the rowing business and frankly said, well, you know what, this pond is just too small. There's got to be another business model out there. So one of the things I identified with our business is that one of the biggest sellers, the largest revenue of the company, was this rowing jacket. And this rowing jacket was this unique thing called a Stevenson jacket. And along the way, Boathouse bought the Stevenson company, which just happened to be also located in Philadelphia. And the jacket became our biggest single piece of business. And the jacket was migrating into other sports, even though it was a jacket created exclusively for the sport of rowing.
What's special about it in those days that it was tailored and could work, if you were a rower? Was it the give in the shoulders?
Yeah, so I'll give you the quick history on the rowing jacket. So Hugh Stevenson, who started Stevenson Industries making the jacket, he was a world-class rower. And he was training he's racing in Lucerne in 1974 at the World Championships. And when the World Championships are usually in August, September. And it's particularly warm that time of year in Switzerland. But it wasn't this year. It was cold and it was wet. It was nasty. And at the time, the U.S. team, what did you have to go out and train in what weather? You had either a big, bulky sweatshirt that just got soaked and heavy and was incredibly uncomfortable, or you wore a jacket. But the jacket would restrict your upper body mobility. At best, the sleeves would pull up halfway up your arms. But in general, the jacket would restrict the movement of your lats and your shoulders and everything else, and would restrict your movement, Stevenson noticed the Soviets, and they were the Soviets back there in 1974, were rowing in a jacket that seemed to move with them. And at the end of the 1974 World Championships, Stevenson traded a pair of blue jeans
for the jacket.
For one of these jackets.
Yeah,
and
smart.
And he brought it back to Philly, and Hugh Stevenson tinkered with it for 2 years, and he improved upon the design, and his first order was for the 1976 U.S. Olympic team that was competing in Montreal, which we have. I have one of the original jackets here along with a check from the USOC.
Do you still make a jacket that's very similar to that?
We make a jacket. We still make the Stevenson jacket in honor of Stevenson. It's still a big seller for rowing. But we took the fundamental functional elements from the jacket and put it into other styles, which have been our top sellers for 30 years. What you asked the question, what made the jacket unique? Well, number one, it has what we call orbital shoulder gussets, and these gussets separate the arms of the jacket from the torso, so that there's no restriction of upper body mobility.
Right.
And the gussets are behind the shoulders, between the torso, body of the jacket, and the sleeves, and they open and close, and it's mesh. So not only do they allow total upper body mobility, but the gussets are mesh, so it pulls in air and helps ventilate the jacket along with the cape back. Rowing, once you get moving in rowing, you're generating an enormous amount of heat, an enormous amount of wattage. You don't really need to wear anything heavy, but you need to be protective. So the jacket was made with fabrics that protected rowers from the cold, nasty weather. A day like today in Philly, I think it's 38 degrees and it's raining. And if you want to train for rowing, you want to be on the water. So this jacket would allow you to train in cold, wet weather and have no restriction of movement in the boat. It included a few other elements. It had a tail. The tail extended down, and the tail was meant to protect the lower lumbar of the rower. So on a cold, wet day, you go out, you're going backwards. And if there's any kind of wind or any kind of wind or chop, water will splash off the riggers of the boat because the rowing shell sits very low to the water. The seat you're on is sitting at about the same level of the water, but the gunwales of the boat might be 6 inches above the water,
right.
And water splashes. And if you're working hard, your back is susceptible to injury, and if that cold water splashes your back, you could pull muscle. So the tail is to protect the lower back of the rower. Now, the tail over the years has taken on a life of its own in different sports. So the Stevenson rowing jacket is still popular among athletes in other sports and various sports. So in soccer, they think it's to sit on the bench, right?
Right.
In golf, and the gussets really work well with golf. In golf, the tail took on a life of its own, so that if it's a rainy day and you bend down to pick your ball out of the cup of the hole, the rain doesn't run down the back of your pants, you know?
Wow.
In equestrian and bicycling, it's kind of obvious. You're bending over, so it's protecting your backside, and the same thing. And it's taken on a life of its own in other sports. But the gussets and the cape back and some of the other fundamental parts of the Stevenson rowing jacket, we designed into what is called the Mission and the Victory jackets, and those jackets today are still our biggest sellers, and the Mission itself is still growing. It works with all sports.
Hey, John, how did you refocus all the mental acuity and your passion and refocus it towards the business? Was that a challenge? And did it fill that need? You compared what your sport to a miler, and I always think about runners and long-distance sports people, athletes, long-distance athletes as very, very focused. So is there a parallel between the focus you brought to your sport and the focus you bring to your company?
Absolutely. I think, everybody talks about a vision. And, in a business, you have a mission statement, you have a vision. And a mission statement is what you're trying to do today, what you're trying to achieve. And a vision is meant to be a stretch, And when I had my vision to make the Olympic team, it was clearly a stretch. It was a stretch for me, but I kind of broke it down into what I thought I had to achieve in order to make it. And, a combination of tenacity and persistence and stupidity and whatever, and luck. In anything in business and anything success, there's a certain amount of luck that's involved.
Exactly.
But I had the vision to make the Olympic team, and it worked. And I got there. And I had with the rowing business, I had that vision, and that was pretty easy because I realized there was a niche. There wasn't anybody doing rowing clothes in the U.S. But then when I decided to change the company to an outerwear business, really had to create the vision from something I wasn't that aware of. I knew people were buying jackets from us for different sports, but I spent some time putting a business plan together, and the vision for Boathouse becoming the best custom outerwear company in the world was very simple. Number one is to become the best company or best custom outerwear company in the world. But the vision wasn't to hit a certain revenue or sell a certain number of jackets. The vision was very simply, we wanted every athlete competing on teams in the world to think that, all right, Boathouse makes the best outerwear for us. We may not buy from them because they're too expensive. We may not buy from them because we have a deal with somebody else. We may not buy from them because our uncle owns a sporting goods shop, but we know that Boathouse makes the best custom outerwear in the world, and that was the vision. So with that, and actually I think I still have the picture of when I drew that vision for the employees of the company at the time, which were 17.
Right, yes.
And we reached that vision, and we know we reached it by the mid-'90s because by the mid-'90s, Boathouse was outfitting the entire NFL. And to this day, we're outfitting most of the NFL, although you won't see a Boathouse logo because we make the product for whoever the current licensee of the NFL is, which today it's Nike. But back then it was Starter and Apex One, and then Nike and Adidas got into it for a while, and then Logo Athletic and Puma and Reebok. So since 1995, we've been outfitting most of the teams, if not all of them, NFL teams. But in the mid-'90s, we outfitted the U.S. soccer, both men and women's U.S. soccer team. We outfitted the Brazilians, the Argentinians, the Polish team, the Japanese team.
Wow, so that's cool. They literally were coming to you from all over the world.
From all over the world.
Yeah.
You remember the movie Invictus?
Yes, of course, yes.
So, the story was was Nelson Mandela, but the backdrop was rugby, and we actually outfitted both those teams that year at that World Championship. The All Blacks, Nike paid for. The All Blacks were the New Zealand team, and the Springboks were the South African team.
Yeah, I remember it was green. It was like green and yellow, wasn't it? Those
Yeah. Same colors as the Packers.
Let me ask you this. One thing that's been very important to you has been to stay in Philadelphia, to be an American company or a U.S. based company, and that you manufacture in the U.S. Can you tell me why, and why particularly Philly? Why was that a goal and very important to you?
Philly, because this is where I live.
You
Philly,
easily could have outsourced overseas, though. I mean,
Yeah, we could have. Now, yes and no. So initially, I tried to outsource, but what I realized is not only did we want to produce the best custom outerwear in the world, but as our business was growing in team sports in colleges and high schools, we also wanted to provide the best service. And it was very difficult for us to provide the level of service when we didn't have control over the product.
Right.
And one of my strategies has always been speed. And I believe if a business can bring its product to market faster than anybody else, and I don't care if it's apparel or food or legal advice or whatever, the faster you can deliver the product to the consumer, you're always going to win. So as we were contracting out, what we kept running into is delays and
barriers.
And I think it was 1994, approximately. Well, and in 1994, 93, 94, we had cutting and sewing, but we were outsourcing all our decoration and graphics, and about half the cutting and sewing was being done through contractors, again, in Western PA and North Carolina and Tennessee. We couldn't deliver. We could not deliver fast or reliably. So I made the commitment sometime in 1994 to manage the whole process, and we just started investing in everything so that we can control the whole process, which we have followed to this day. The reason we stayed in Philly is just because back in the day, back in the mid-'90s, early '90s, you couldn't produce stuff abroad. And today you can, but there's still a lot of challenges to it.
Right. I think you control the process a little better when it's in your backyard, right? Because you work at the factory, at the facility where those jackets are made. Isn't that true?
Right. Well, we eventually, and as of today, we produce 100% in our own vertically integrated factory. So, we've got 100,000 square feet that it has basically everything except we inventory the raw materials, but we don't make the raw materials. And our work in process time in this factory is about 4.5 days, and our average delivery is about 18 days from the day a customer orders a custom product. Now, that said, we started to develop our own retail products, so you can go on boathouse.com and order a Gore-Tex jacket and it ships the next day, or a soft shell or something else. But these are pre-made or in inventory, so we can ship them fast. The other commitment to do it in Philly was quality control. Again, back in the late 80s, 90s, as more and more manufacturing was shifting to China primarily, the level of quality coming out of Asia was not what it is today. I mean, it is much better today. You can get really good needle out of Southeast Asia.
All these years later, what are you most proud of with your company? What do you feel is your crowning achievement with the company? You employ a lot of people.
Yeah, I enjoy employing people. And this is a little off topic. One of the things that drives me is I like to help people. I like to do good by people, and as long as I've been in Philadelphia, I've been in various nonprofits, and I think there's two ways you can really help people, particularly in a city like Philadelphia. You can either educate them, or you can provide opportunity. I'm not an educator, so therefore my mission personally is to help people by providing opportunity, and I think we do that here at Boathouse. And there's more than a few people that like right now, my production manager, he's Mike Santiago. He's a young Latino. He's 35 years old. He's married. He's got 4 beautiful daughters. he started here as a screen printer, making, somewhere probably under $10. Now he's running a factory of 200 people. He tells me constantly we saved his life because he came from a really tough neighborhood in North Philadelphia, where we're located. And I guess, half his friends are either, dead or incarcerated.
Right.
Yeah. And Mike said that's the path he was going down. And so we've provided opportunity for people like him who's making, a lot of money. He owns 2 houses. I don't know why he owns 2, but he does. He's got a beautiful family. And so I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of. But
I agree with you. I think entrepreneurs, we provide opportunities and we hopefully grow people and help people. I think that sometimes that's overlooked. People, it isn't. There is a greater vision and a greater reason for, starting a company. So I can relate to that for sure. What's your next goal for Boathouse Sports?
Our goal is very simple, and COVID has kind of accelerated the goal. But we want to make Boathouse a household name for elite athletic apparel that is high quality, that is made in the USA by a company that has a great workplace, that provides a sustainable model, and that can actually win by producing in the U.S.
Yes.
We make great apparel for teams. We always have. So we now want to move the brand to a broader market. And we've made some changes recently in the business to achieve that. I brought in a woman by the name of Cindy DeFrantonio, and she is now the president and CEO of Boathouse. She's been here for 5 weeks. So our goal is we want to build the brand online. We want to build a brand that can address the needs of the Olympian in all of us, which is what I like to say, because there is an Olympian in all of us, and provide phenomenal products. I would say that with COVID, there's probably more attention that we're making in the USA. We will leverage that. Prior to COVID, I would say 2% of our team customers cared that it was in the U.S., but I think that's a much more significant story to tell. We have 30 years of true athletic heritage, providing products for the best athletes in the world. And we want to bring the Boathouse brand to a much broader consumer base in the U.S.
Terrific. What stories are you reading? What books are you reading? What are you watching on television? What interests you?
Well, I've been reading a lot about, what would I call it? I guess one of my favorite books I've read recently, and is *Sapiens*.
Okay.
Have you heard of *Sapiens*?
I have not heard of that book.
I forget the author, but he's an Israeli author who essentially illustrates in very novel fashion why humans, Homo sapiens, act like we do. So I'm spending a lot of time reading about behavior of humans in particular. I mean, the thing that concerns me more than anything is just us destroying our planet, and everybody talks about us destroying the planet, but the reality is we're not destroying the planet, we're destroying ourselves, because the planet, as soon as humans are gone, will recover probably in about 5 years.
Things do have to change, but I am hopeful. I mean, it seems like you're a very hopeful person, I would say, right? Do you feel that way? You dream of big things, and you certainly in your life have really set out on a dream, set out on a path, and by God, you get there. That's a wonderful thing. Thank you so much for your time today, and really appreciate you telling us about your Olympic career and your rowing career, and best of luck to you at Boathouse Sports.
Thank you.